Okay, we're going to talk about a problem having to do with art that I wrestled with for a long time, and I think it's really worth wrestling with. And to me, it comes back to being in a class at Wheaton. I remember where it was the first time I'd ever really been forced to reckon with abstract art. I had this professor who took us into our final project of the semester, took us into the Chicago Institute of Art, which was, it still is, a fantastic art museum. At the time, it was donations accepted. You know, you could go in for a penny if you wanted to. Now it's like up to $15 a person, but just like Birmingham Museum, you guys know that the Birmingham Museum is free. You can go in anytime you want. And there are Egyptian artifacts in the Birmingham Museum that are 5,000 years old. Okay? I mean, it's a pretty cool little museum, plus tons of medieval art and some really cool modern stuff. Anyway, I would go in there, and then we had to go in and we had to write this paper, this observational paper, but he limited us. He's like, you can't go like medieval, you can't go look at Van Gogh. You had to go to like the modern and 20th century section, the place where, like, I mean, literally one of the works of art in the 20th century section was a string of Christmas lights plugged into a socket, wadded up on the ground, and there was like a little name card by it, you know, Untitled 14 by Noah. You know? it's just like, you're like, that? Did you pay for that? You know, how much did that cost? You know, and then there was a plastic orange plank leaning against the wall. You know, again, like orange plank number 3. And you're like, how much was that? You know, I don't know. Anyway, it was crazy. But we had to go there and pick one of these abstract pieces of art. I'm actually going to show you one of the pieces I saw when I went there that kind of started profoundly affecting me. But I really began, you know, went in thinking like a lot of young people think, like, if it doesn't look like the thing it's supposed to be, then what's it worth? I always thought good art was the most accurate art. But I gradually have learned and come to think a little differently. So let's just define some terms to start. Mimesis is going to be representation or imitation of the real world in art or literature. So it's a fancy word for representation or imitation. You can see its relationship to our word imitation. But it's almost exclusively used to mean the kind of imitation that an artist is aiming to achieve. Whether they are a true artist, you know, sort of putting paint on a canvas or sculpting something out of clay, or even if they're a novelist or a poet. Now, Aristotle would say, and he kind of got us thinking this way, that tragedy is mimesis of action in life. So we're reading a tragedy here. We've read several tragedies already. Aristotle describes the tragedy as saying this is an imitation of life. And he used the word mimesis there. And the second half of this goes, do you guys remember what this says from last year? Do you remember talking about tragedy? What effect is it supposed to have on the viewer? Pity and fear? Is that catharsis? Does that ring any bells? I can't remember how deep we went into this, but it's an imitation of life that arouses pity and fear to achieve catharsis of these emotions. So, whenever you see a tragic play, it ought to have the effect of making you feel sorry for their condition and somewhat kind of afraid of seeing the same thing happen to yourself. So, which means right off the bat that there are 3 types of characters that are really never going to work in a tragedy. Someone who has just real bad luck, okay? Super bad luck. You just see someone, you know, plant falls on them from a window overhead and that'd be comedy almost, you know, just to see someone who, like, one thing after another goes wrong and they can't stop it. There's not going to be a lot of pity there, or might be a lot of pity, but no real fear. You know, I mean, you're not going to it's so unlikely. The other thing you never want to see in tragedy is you never want to see a villain who has just an unbroken stroke of good luck, okay? It just would leave you with a sour taste in your mouth, right? So we don't want to see a saint or someone who's really good just gradually deteriorating into the most miserable state imaginable. That's why it's not a great. So Job, okay? Job, not a great tragic hero, okay? 2, just seems like bad luck goes wherever he goes. Similarly, okay, you don't want to see the good guy just winning all the time. I mean, the bad guy winning all the time. Neither of these is going to really work the way it's supposed to. And the last one, we don't even really like to see an unfortunate villain. Okay, it doesn't help us a ton to see the bad guy get what they deserve. Now, this is what we like in the modern, film. We want to see a good guy, a bad guy, and see the bad guy end up, being brought to justice. But that's why we don't have a lot of tragedies anymore. We don't, tragedy is not about the bad guy being brought to justice. Because none of these character types are really going to evoke pity and fear the way Aristotle wants them to. And I think Aristotle would also argue they're not super good imitations of life. Okay? They're entertaining. You might even say they're amusing. That is, they get you to stop thinking about life. But a tragedy is going to get you thinking about life. A tragedy's point is to make you muse, not to make you amused. Okay? Did you ever notice that word before? Amusement means without, like apathetic, okay, without feeling. Amusing means without the muse, without thought, without any, imagination. So when we say we are amused, it's not necessarily a compliment. Okay, the ideal tragic hero is going to be the unfortunate, pretty good guy. Okay, so we don't want someone who's just absolutely perfect, has no besetting sins, and we don't want them to just have to get what they deserve. We want someone who is a pretty good guy, but ends up right. So we had Oedipus. Now, right off the bat, we were like, oh. Clytemnestra, Agamemnon, those guys make sense. Clytemnestra's just like, you might not like her in the end, but you get why she's mad. Okay? Agamemnon, you don't like what he did, but you get where he was. He was in a hard spot. But Aristotle's always talking about Oedipus, and I've always thought, how's this guy supposed to be such a good example of tragedy? Because he's an almost flawless guy, except for his arrogance when, he initially is told what that he's the man, but otherwise he's a pretty good guy, and his sin is unlocatable. It's like, what did he do wrong? That was the big takeaway from this play last year, is we couldn't find anything he'd done wrong, and that actually really was telling to us, because it reminded us that being human is sort of carrying with you a guilt without sin. What we call moral concomitance. Even when you're doing the good, evil is kind of woven into all your actions. Oedipus became the allegory of that for us. And I don't know. I wonder to what extent that same effect was achieved on ancient audiences. But when we get to Macbeth, it gets even a little more difficult. He's even more problematic than Oedipus, because by the time this play ends, he is the devil incarnate. He is as bad as you'd want to be. Just, and he's become such a kind of horrifically evil person that when he finally dies, as all tragedies in the same way, but when he finally dies, you're like, phew. Okay? So one of the questions we'll be asking is just, how is Shakespeare imitating life back to us? Because as a tragic hero, Macbeth doesn't seem to kind of fit the bill. There's a few scenes where you're going to think, all right, pretty good guy, and then after that, it's just into just total depravity. But how is he? That's one of the big questions we'll be asking. How is Shakespeare now imitating life back to us? Now, let's just talk a little bit about what makes for good mimesis, because this is where I think things get interesting, right? Now, mimesis could be, in a non-artistic context, this happens all the time. Okay, if you can't afford the real thing, you buy the generic brand, and you accept some compromise in taste. If you're like me, though, I think the Aldi Cheez-Its are better than the brand name Cheez-Its. I don't know how they did that, but they are. I just think they're better. I don't feel that way about any Oreos. I think Oreo has some kind of unique magic potion, but Aldi Cheez-Its are better than real Cheez-Its. So anyway, a good imitation, okay, this is just like basic imitation, not mimesis, is going to capture extrinsic qualities. You can test the quality of good imitation just by looking carefully, all right? Which makes some work like this so absolutely stunning. So you can see it. Now, it's probably pretty cool right now just to take a look at what you think you're looking at here. Most of you probably think it's a photograph. it is painting. What you're looking at here is an artist on the right-hand side who is putting the finishing touches on a work of art they've done that is in a genre called photorealism. So this whole back thing here is hand-painted. Not a single photographic element in it. And this is actually pretty common. And the technique is obviously really complicated and advanced and requires super attention to detail. But you can imagine if all you had to paint was like 1 square inch at a time, you could maybe pull this off. You've seen iPads that can do this now, right? iPads that will take a complicated image and like you could blow it up real big and work on just this much at a time. If you do that over and over again, you get a pretty accurate rendering, right? Well, photorealists are trying, okay? Their one goal is to make the image that they paint indistinguishable from a photograph, okay? And that's like basic imitation, right? And if the only point of art is to do that, then they've kind of achieved the apex, right? What do you think would be the highest expression of art? If the real point of art is to replicate flawlessly the experience of actual life so that it's indistinguishable from it, where are we going to find the highest expression of art? It's not going to be painting because that's two-dimensional. It's not going to be sculpture because it's three-dimensional but inanimate. It's in the metaverse, right? I mean, can you think about that though? Like if that's what art's all about, if the point is that I just want to make it look real, wouldn't virtual reality all of a sudden, like, this future virtual reality where things begin to have a photorealistic quality, okay? It would be like and so you can see the absurdity of thinking that art is just to be accurate, okay? Art isn't good because it's accurate. And that was one of the hardest things I had to get out of my head until I came across this guy, Les Chevaux by Raymond Duchamp-Villon. I was in the Chicago Museum tooling around and I spotted this from a distance. Couldn't see what it was called, couldn't see anything about it. And as soon as I saw it, I went, that is a horse. That's not just a horse. That is, you know where I'm going? Horseness. This is the form of horse. This artist has gotten it. This is better than any photograph you could see, any painting you could see of an actual horse. Because what this artist has done is he's gone inside the horse. Not literally, that'd be gross. He's gone inside to the inner landscape of the horse, the thing God has made. And he's looked at the spirit of this animal. Not the spirit animal, the spirit of the animal. And he's put it in sculpture. Because it looks partly like a horse and partly like a locomotive, right? It's got aspects of the train, with the wheel at the shoulder, hard, kind of almost machine-like lines at times, to convey to you what's it like being next to this animal. It's like being next to a train that's about ready to take off from the station. It's a sense of power, a sense that you're not totally safe, a sense that the thing you are with is both beautiful and elegant in some ways, but so massively powerful and capable of so much exertion. So this is what did it for me. Not everybody's going to feel the same way about every sculpture, but I've increasingly come to like abstract sculpture. It's just, for my money, it does the mimesis trick. It takes something that I've seen 1,000 times and shows me what I've always been missing. And that's what mimesis really should be doing, okay? Not just hyper-accurate representation of something you've seen before, okay? We all like it. Preston, you draw something and you're like, oh, that's amazing. That's so good. Look at the detail. We all love that kind of praise. That's not what art is about. Art is about just helping you to see what you would otherwise miss. Helping you see what you would otherwise miss. And I think sometimes the abstract expression is the best way to achieve that. Because, as we've seen, some of the most important characteristics and features are invisible to the naked eye. And if what you're using is visual presentation, whether it's on the stage or on a canvas, it's important that you as an artist know some of the most beautiful, important features of a thing are not going to be available to the camera. Okay? So with Mother Teresa, if you were representing, trying to tell someone what a beautiful soul she really is, that's going to shape the way you sculpt her. Okay? And it might not lead you to aim at 100% accuracy, right? It might. You might find that there's a way of doing it that just speaks. You might think that her smile is all she needs or something like that, okay? So what happens if we're doing mimesis of human action? Well, we're gonna have to then know what we mean by human, okay? So if we're going to see represented on the stage human action presented back to us, not just in documentary realism, okay, but in mimesis, so that we see what we ordinarily miss. We first of all have to know what a human is. What is a human? Because that's going to be our test of a great work of art. Does a human present us with a clearer, deeper picture of what we know a human is really made out of? Because if this is all that the camera shows us, okay, if all you get is beautiful people doing cool stuff, I hope you know by now that you are being pandered to. Okay? It might be fun. Okay, don't get me wrong. I love to watch Tom Cruise kick people's butts. All right, it's fun. I like to watch him fly airplanes. Fine, great, okay, it's cool. But I hope you understand that's pandering. And they're just tickling the surface level. You're not actually getting enriched by this kind of film. A film that's going to enrich you is going to take you into the heart of true humanity, and here is how we will define that after having read the Constellation. My colors are being lost here. Don't you worry, we're going to have this thing down pat before this year's over. What is man? A creature who cannot be happy without attaining divinity, who will either mature fully through participating in God's nature or deteriorate into a monstrosity through his idolatry of false goods. So I'll give you some time to get that copied down in the notes. Grab my copy of Macbeth. Okay, you guys got it? No, you ready? The book. Oh, good job. Okay, make sure your names are in this. Our big question then is, will Macbeth provide us with mimesis of human life, okay? If a human is the kind of thing that can only be happy through sharing in God's divinity, whose two courses of action are either to grow increasingly mature and to increasingly like his creator, or to deteriorate into a monstrosity of nothingness. Now, that's a new phrase, monstrosity of nothingness. We're going to unpack that in the course of the next few weeks. You've either got nothingness or God, and that's where you can go. And let's just see how well Shakespeare does at showing us that reality, okay? And I realize that says, will Macbeth provides. Sorry for the agreement problem.